Um, Great. So that we have everything registered in all of the 4 languages. Okay, so I think, and again, for everyone who has been here and who hasn't been here, what we've seen over the past 2 weeks was that, there is a lot of knowledges about the priorities of feminist organizations, how you're working across the regions, the activities you're carrying out, the powerful strategies that all of the different organizations assume. And I think for us as a team and as facilitators, it has been really moving to listen to the experiences that you shared in the first 2 sessions and also on our Google Classroom. And I think just to start with that, we really want to thank everyone for their contributions so far and for their participation in this space. What we would also like to do in the coming 2 sessions is to put an increasing emphasis on discussions that will help us to find ways of working together beyond the co-learning space and to really strengthen our advocacy cross-regionally. And of course, we know that the 2-hour sessions that we're having are very little time to do so. And so I think there are 3 things that we would like to do over the next week to really allow us to, harness the most out of that. So on the one hand, you will notice that we continue behind the scenes to make sure that all the materials from the session is becoming accessible in all of the 4 languages, and that we're uploading that onto our Google Classroom so that you can also use it and share it. And we're also having Pilar with us, who is doing those wonderful drawings that you can see on the slide, documenting our discussions and the different inputs. And then I also want to alert you again to 2 documents that we want to put together, which help us to be able to connect with each other. So on the one hand, there is the advocacy calendar, the Google Sheet that we've already asked you in the first session to fill in, and which we again please ask you to add all of the events that you're going to contribute to over the next year, so that we can make sure that we're coalesced around certain events. But importantly also, and that has been also a request from some of you, we're going to build up a participant list, which not only gives you, the email addresses, the countries where you're working from, the organizations, but where we also ask you to input the different issues that you're working on, so that it's really important and possible for all of us to say, come together. The organizations that, for example, are working on land rights, the organizations that are working on violence, and of the different issues that we've been discussing over those weeks. So we'll share the 2 links with you in the chat, but just please to make sure that you're contributing to this, because that would really help us to make this co-learning space live on over the 4 sessions that we're having together, and to really make the most of all those really, really interesting and powerful conversations that we're having. So the session for today is really to talk about inequalities in the fields of reproductive care and women's labor, or women's unpaid labor, and to engage with the redistribution, recognition, and revalorizations of the roles and responsibilities of women as carers in different spheres. So what we have asked you to prepare and to input, and thanks to those who have, was to think about what the most typical stereotypes are which women, children, and diversities face in your country, and what specifically the stereotypes are about their roles as carers. And I think what we want to start with today is really to engage a bit in these discussions. There have been a lot of really insightful comments coming up about the role of, say, religions, the stigma of women as, just being for household chores, for taking care of children, but not, being intelligent enough to work in certain kinds of jobs, etc. So what I would like to start with is just to give the floor to any reflections, either from those who have contributed. I know that Hilary, that Anna, that Andrea have commented on the chat. So if you want to, on the Google Classroom, so if you want to expand on any of those comments, please do so. And just to say also, there was this beautiful photo from Sixa that was shared with a comic that said, "Mom, what would you like to be if you would live?" I'm not sure this is the best way of translating it, but it's, I think, quite, quite telling. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a second to see anyone who would like to just share about the stereotypes about the caring roles of women in their countries. Mara, go ahead, please.
Gracias. Buenas a todos.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. That was a comic from Mafalda. So there was a mother doing all of the daily activities in the home. And the question was, what would you have wanted to be if you had a real life? Is the question in the comic. So there's no personal project in this book, and Mafalda realizes it, that the mom didn't have her personal project. And Mafalda, by the way, is a comic character who's a little girl from Argentina by an artist Kino, and she represents a lot of the typical family in Argentina in this comic.
Thank you, Mara. And I think that's exactly like one of the most dominant narratives that we heard also in your responses on the classroom, no, was about the role of the woman as the caretaker of the children, full-time job that is not recognized. And then that's it. So basically, as a stigma. So anyone else who would like to share or expand on what you have written? Eliane, yes, please.
Well, thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to say that the role of women, according to the exchanges that we have had here, Cameroon, in Africa, women take care of their house. And they are considered as chief of families. And they occupy a secondary role. There are many women that have emancipated and now have a second job outside from their house. But what I would like to say, according to what Mara and the others have mentioned, is that socially we have to take care of our homes, and women have decided to keep that role because they want things to be good for their children at home. So they cannot just neglect it. But we want to have a balance. How is women going to be taking care of her children, of her house, and of her life as well? And how can she contribute to community? How are we going to consider her social role having her balance in life? Because within the context we are living in, she has made that role her own. That is the thing. So how are we going to be creating awareness of giving her balance? Thank you.
Thank you, Eliane, for highlighting the multiple roles. I think that's very important, that question of you know, finding balance, being able to make decisions, and on recognizing the various roles which women are assuming. And also, I think a point that you made, which was also raised in the Google Classroom, was about intergenerational changes, and how roles of women have been changing over time. So thank you for that. Priscilla?
Hello, let's see if my camera works. Hi, everyone. I'm gonna talk a little bit about Tanzania. That's where I do most of my research work. So with women working in construction and in self-construction, they play a very important role in the community, and they have the double shift that we talk so much about. They are the main holders of the self-construction in their neighborhoods, deal with patriarchy there. But a very important part is that they also have to do a lot of their work at home. One stereotype that I see, and I wrote that like very quickly just now on the chat, is that with students at the university, I always had the male students raising their hand and volunteering to do presentations, and I was always impressed by that reaction in a more university academic setting in the city. But there is a big division of gender even at that level. And then when you look at the data in the professional, despite how educated men and women are in Tanzania, there is a big gender inequality, even at the university. There's very little women so far that become professors when you compare to men. So that's just a little bit about Tanzania. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Priscilla. We have Penda and then Hilary. Penda, please go ahead.
Allô, tu m'entends? Allô?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I am sorry I arrived a bit late because this morning we had a power outage. And I cannot work with my laptop, so I have to connect with my mobile phone. So if I disconnect, you need to understand me. Regarding the role of women at home, we talked about sanitation and see the influence in a very invasive way, the role of women at home. When we talk to about 10 women, women have the obligation of taking care and cleaning the toilets because that is the role that society has given them. So we interview men as well, and those men just said, we go out to work and women stay at home and do house chores. So morally speaking, it is women that are in difficult situation, even financially speaking. So example, when we try to involve men in taking care of sanitation at home, they never think about taking care or cleaning the toilets. And I don't think that they will accept that task. That's sure. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Pinda. And I'm really looking forward that we also have your contributions later in the session to really also show us through the video what you've just started talking about, which is, you know, a very important lens also on the role of women as carers, no, in sanitation work. We have Hilary, Nadia, and then Sam, and then I think we will go into our presentations. Hilary?
Hi, thank you, Julia. I just wanted to add on my comments on the issue of how women, maybe in my country, they excluded mostly from from decision-making platforms or positions, and also in politics. Most of the women who are seen to be participating in politics are most of the time branded in some way, and it is naturally maybe for the country that women do not participate in political activities. Women are not included in political decision-making issues, and most of the time when you find them in decision-making platforms, they are mainly maybe by what we have our parliament where we have a proportional representation, where we have a quota of saying, no, we have women who have to come into parliament. So the issue around merit is very restricted in terms of participating in political activities or decision-making activities in my country. So that's one of the stereotypes which I find very disturbing, whereby women are only seen as followers and not kind of people who can lead and also make decisions. So thank you. That's just my brief contribution.
Thank you, Hilary. And just also to everyone else who doesn't know Hilary, he's doing amazing work in Zimbabwe, and that's the context where he's talking from. Nadia.
Hola, buen día para todas. Para
Hello, good day for everyone. You know, talking about the role of transvestites, people who are transgender in care roles, I'd like to talk about it because we're in a hypersexualized context and culture just from childhood. So when one begins to hear stories about sisters here in Argentina, some are talking about situations of prostitution as children, you know? So I do think that a lot of times the function or the role that has been assigned to women who are cis women, women who are not trans, that might be two roles or tending to have two roles. One is to reproduce and have children. And they're sort of obliged to give birth. And another aspect is to attend sexually to their husbands or to their partners. But we as transvestites and transgenders, we are like women or something that looks like women, they might say. Sometimes we're told we don't even want to talk about women's rights in this discussion. Even many people say it that way as if it wasn't relevant, but something that gets taken up is this question of sexual care for males. So we're continuing in this role of offering as transvestites, as transgender, we're having a broad percentage of us And I don't think I'm exaggerating if I'm talking about 90% of transvestites and transgenders have been in a role of prostitution. It would seem that society continues to assign this role to us of taking care of men sexually. And having to be in charge of the family, for example, as people who have also been parents of children, or looking at us in a family role. We're always assigned to be getting prepared for this task, getting prepared to be the reproducer, or everything is always seen from that system of reproduction. And I think it's important to talk about this, because when you get out of that spot or that place, you know, I'm actually a public official, and sometimes I have this feeling that every time I go and make steps forward, or you get to a certain point or place, sometimes it's people are very suspicious. You know, now what do these people want? What are they going to do? And because we're coming from a dishumanized place of the whore, or the puto is a male whore. So, and can also be a derogatory term for faggot as well. Excuse me for using derogatory terms. And so here we've been weaving and talking about this from a political sphere as well. And also we need to look at the non-political spheres. So right now, I play a very important role, and I'm trying to think that many, I'd like to say, well, some people are trying to dispute this sense of these functions or roles that are assigned to us that are only thought about in terms of men and women. And I don't want to go on too much here, and thank you much, but thank you very much for the opportunity, but it's another layer to look at.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nadia, for all your very deep reflections and very profound angles also, that, you know, you remind us that we're talking about women, about diversities, and about the different roles of carers. And also, I think, bringing the perspective of when we are socialized as children and very early on, you know, how those stigmas are being nurtured, and really, you know, and also the political dimension, I think, of what we're talking about right now. We have Sam, please, and then we go on to our presentations.
Yes, thank you, Julia and Nadia and the speakers before. I would like to share experiences from Kenya on the role of women as caregivers. First, in two perspectives. The first one is in rural settings, and the other one is in the urban areas. Women in the rural areas are viewed as primary caregivers, offering emotional and social support to the family, while on the other hand, the man has the primary role of economically supporting the family. While in urban areas, we have seen this role evolving, with women departing from the traditional role of offering emotional and social support to the family and moving on to offering economical support to the family. And this we can attribute to the different social settings in urban areas than in rural areas. As in urban areas, the women tend to interact with people from diverse cultures, and they learn some of these things from them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam, for sharing that. And we're gonna have two experiences, and I see Deborah from Cerepo here and from Cereca, who are gonna talk also about the peri-urban and the interfaces in between what you just described. So thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I think that was a really wide breadth of answers that really get us going for that session. I'm going to hand over now to Adriana to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, everyone, for such a wonderful kickoff discussion. Starting with the stereotypes, I think that's a crucial challenge that we need to push forward. I'm going to introduce, as Julia said, we have a round of presentations and further inputs. And the first one is by Dr. Kader Atrouche. So I want to welcome Dr. Atrouche for showing and thank him for joining us today. He's a senior researcher at the Agricultural Research and Extension Authority in Yemen. He holds a PhD from Bulgaria, obtained in 1997, and he's specialized in agricultural irrigation. Dr. Atrouche has coordinated several regional research projects under the supervision of the International Center for Agricultural Research in the Dry Areas, ICARDA, and the Food for Agriculture Organization, FAO, of the United Nations. He's currently the head of the Food Security Technical Secretariat at the Ministry of Planning and International Cooperation, MOPIC, and his presentation will focus on reproductive health care and women's unpaid work in the Republic of Yemen. Dr. Atrouche, the floor is yours.
شكرا جزيلا لكم. اسمحوا لي أن أعمل شير للورقة.
Thank you very much. Allow me to share my paper. I'm trying to upload the paper. I'm getting a message that the host is disabled.
You should be enabled now.
Can you hear me?
Dr. Atrouche, I think that now you have the rights to share your paper.
Hassanan, can you see the paper?
Yes, we can now. We can see the presentation. Perhaps you can change it to show screen mode so that we can see it bigger. Thank you.
I'm happy to present a short picture of the reproductive health care and women's unpaid work in the Republic of Yemen. Yemen is in the southwestern part of the Arabian Peninsula. Its total area is 555,000 square kilometers with about 32 million population. The annual growth rate is 2.8%. Women constitute 49.1% of the total population. The reproductive fertility rate is high in the rural areas with 5.1 children per mother, and it's also high for uneducated or illiterate women. It has to do also with reproductive care. 46.6% in rural areas did not receive any care. And in the rural areas, there is about 13.8 compared with the urban areas of number of visits, 4 visits and more. In the urban is 75 visits, and in the rural areas it's 15. So the number of visits is less in the rural areas. With the relation to illiterate women, they did not receive care and they reach up to 50%. In rural areas, 46.6%. The women who have received health care, the illiterate women were 47%, and the basic education is 68%. In the secondary is 74%, and with the women with high education levels, the care reached 93%. As for rural areas, the number of women who receive care is about 51%, while in urban areas it's about 79%. with relation to the maternity, the women's death rate reached in urban, the total is 184 deaths. It's a high level, a high rate. The third objective of SDGs said that in 2030, the number of deaths should be less than 70%. With relation to the births, women who give birth with a doctor are 45% for the urban areas compared to 18% in rural areas. However, women who obtain help in rural areas, 48% who receive help from neighbors. It's a high percentage and usually it's risky. The location of birth, 75% in rural areas and 49% in urban areas, whereas in the health institutions is a higher percentage in urban areas than in rural areas. In private institutions, it's 18 in urban areas and 8 in rural areas. The rate of deaths under 5 years of age reaches 63 deaths for every 1,000 births, and in urban areas is 44 deaths for every 1,000 births. This is with relation to reproductive health in short, and I will try quickly to address women's work. The total number of workers in Yemen is 970,000 in urban areas and 3 million in the rural areas, about 4 million employees. The women in urban areas is 28%, while in rural areas is 71%. With relation to the educational level, we find that illiterate women occupy 46.7%. With relation to the distribution according to occupation, 50.9% of women working in agriculture and fishing. With relation to the distribution, the relative distribution of workers according to the economic activity, we find also the highest percentage of women in agriculture, fishing, and the herding and shepherding work. With relation to the number of families, according to the head of the family, there's 142,000 women heading households in rural areas compared to 142,000 in urban areas compared to 274 in rural areas. Households headed by men in urban areas is 1,380,000 compared to 2.7 million. The percentage of households headed by women, there are in urban areas, there are 39% married, single are 4%, and 9% of divorced women. This means that the women's percentage in rural areas has a higher percentage than in urban areas with relation to households headed by women. With relation to the gap between women and men workers, according to the place of residence, women working for pay in the rural areas reach 52.4%, sorry. In urban areas, it's 3.3.
The qualitative gap analysis, there every 100 men working for pay has 63 women working for pay. And with relation to women and men employers, there's 31 women for every 100 men. And for women and men who are self-employed, for every 17%, every 100 men who are self-employed, there are 83 women. For those who are unpaid, for every 100 men, there's 410 women who are unpaid. This shows that the percentage of women is higher who work unpaid work, who do unpaid work, particularly in rural areas. These are examples. The first picture to the left is a pregnant woman carrying water, and the women working in rural areas in agriculture also cooking at home. They are carrying the wood and herding the sheep. There are some recommendations to increase the number of rural health centers in rural areas, and health insurance for rural women, sensitize rural women, especially pregnant women, ensure supply of medicine, provide mobile medical teams and clinics to provide reproductive health services, provide qualified health staff and health services, provide family planning and birth spacing methods, coordination with international organizations concerned with reproductive health. With relation to unpaid women's work, increase public investment in basic social infrastructure in rural areas to reduce responsibilities of women inside the home, seek to direct rural water projects to provide water transfer networks, bringing them into homes and providing modern means of water and transport, provide modern gas stoves to facilitate women's work instead of having to bring and use firewood, provide soft loans for income-generating projects for rural women, such as raising livestock, sheep, and honeybees, train rural women on crafts such as sewing, embroidery, cooking, engraving, and others. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Keda, for that presentation. My name is Diana Washira, and I'm one of the facilitators of this space. I hope I'm audible enough. It's quite a noisy place. Okay. So what we will do is that I know after that interesting contribution, some of us already have questions and reactions to it. But first, we will have three more contributions from SEDECA, SEDEPO, and then one from FENDA. And then after that, we'll have a question and answer session. So I will go ahead to introduce the first video, which has been done by SEDECA. So SEDECA is a secretariat for the liaison of self-managed communities. It's a civil association that has been working since 1980 to strengthen initiatives to promote popular habitat practice and the social economy in the popular sector of the metropolitan area of the Buenos Aires. In this video, we will hear Macarena Vergara and her colleague talk about a project promoting the productive and caring role of women in the urban space. So we will go ahead and have the video. We'll have the video on, and then we will go to the next one by SEDECA. So I think Nadine.
Verde Aroma es un proyecto productivo conformado por mujeres periurbanas de la localidad de Pilar. Se basa en el cultivo, selección y agregado de valor de plantas aromáticas y medicinales para el bienestar y el cuidado de la salud.
Surge en el marco de un proyecto socioproductivo con perspectiva de género, formulado y puesto en marcha por SEDECA. Tiene la finalidad de promover el empoderamiento y la autonomía de estas mujeres, en términos individuales y colectivos. Surge en plena pandemia, generando posibilidades de encuentro en un contexto de confinamiento.
Trabaja con plantas aromáticas y medicinales, produciendo hierbas para infusiones y otros usos, mezclas para sahumar, sahumos y tinturas madre.
El proyecto comenzó de cero. Se armó un plan de trabajo diseñado según las propias motivaciones de las mujeres. Se llevó a cabo la construcción de huertas de plantas aromáticas y medicinales. Huertas como necesidad de producir materia prima y de calidad agroecológica. Se trabajó para generar valor mediante el deshidratado y el procesamiento artesanal de la materia prima. Estos productos son comercializados a través de canales directos como el mercadito de enlace o el almacén de Fecopiac, que forman parte activa en el proyecto.
El proyecto de mujeres productoras
Sorry?
urbanas.
Can you stop for a while, Nadine? Sorry. It seems like the translation is not working.
Sorry. I was in the wrong channel. I apologize.
Okay, no worries. Could you restart, Nadine?
¿Podemos empezar otra vez?
Yes. Here we go. Thank you.
Okay, can I go again?
¿Empezamos entonces?
I can hear you now on the the Spanish interpreter on the English channel. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah? Ready. Good. Thank you.
Verde Aroma es un proyecto
Verde Aroma
productivo
is a
conformado
productive
por
project
mujeres
made up by
peruanas de la
women
localidad de
of the
Pilar.
suburbs of
Se basa en
Pilar.
el cultivo,
It is
selección
based
y
on
agregado de
the
valor de
collectivization,
plantas aromáticas y
selection
medicinales
of
para el
herbal
bienestar y el cuidado
plants
de la
and
salud.
meats for
Surge en el
the
marco de un
well-being
proyecto
of health. It was
socioproductivo con
created in
perspectiva de
the
género,
framework of a
formulado y
gender
puesto en
product
marcha por SEDECA. Tiene
that
la
was triggered by
finalidad de
SEDECA. Its
promover el
purpose is to
empoderamiento
promote
y la autonomía de
empowerment
estas
and
mujeres,
autonomy
en
of these
términos
women
individuales y
in
colectivos.
individual and
Surge en
collective
plena
terms.
pandemia,
It was created
generando
with the
posibilidades
pandemic
de
and
encuentro
therefore
en un
created the
contexto de
possibility to
confinamiento.
meet during the
Trabaja con
lockdown.
plantas aromáticas
We
y
work with
medicinales,
aromatic and
produciendo
medicinal
hierbas
plants
para
to
infusiones y otros
produce
usos,
herbs
mezclas para
for
sahumar, sahumos y tinturas
incenses,
madre.
for
El
inks and for
proyecto
other
comenzó de
uses.
cero.
The
Se
project
armó un
started
plan de
from
trabajo
scratch. We
diseñado
created a
según las
work plan
propias
that was designed
motivaciones de las
according to
mujeres.
the
Se llevó a
interests
cabo
of
la
women.
construcción de huertas de
We
plantas aromáticas y
created the
medicinales.
construction of
Huertas
these
como necesidad de producir materia
orchids
prima
as
y
a
de
way in
calidad
which to
agroecológica.
create
Se
raw
trabajó para
material
generar
of
valor
high quality.
mediante
The
el
purpose was to
deshidratado y el
create value
procesamiento
by the
artesanal de la materia
dehydration
prima.
and the
Estos
processing of
productos
raw
son
material. The
comercializados a través
products
de
are
canales
traded
directos
through
como el
direct
mercadito
channels
de
such as
enlace
the
o el
mercadito
almacén de
enlace
Fecopiac,
or the
que forman
Fecobat
parte activa en el
workshop that are
proyecto.
part of
El
the
proyecto de
project.
mujeres productoras
The
perurbanas
project
nace
of these
como parte
women
del
was
trabajo
created as
histórico
part
de
of
SEDECA,
the historical
vinculado a
work
sus
of
líneas de
SEDECA
trabajo
by
la
using the
economía
work lines
popular,
of
social y solidaria, el
popular,
hábitat popular y la
solitary
agricultura
economies as well as family
nace como una
agricultural
necesidad de
practices.
acompañar
It
un
was
grupo de
created as a
mujeres,
need
sean
to accompany a
productoras de
group
la
of
agricultura
women
familiar, sean
to be their own
productoras del
producers,
valor,
or
sean
if they were
vecinas
producing for others,
de
being
los
the
barrios aledaños a
neighbors
fintas
of
productivas
other
y sean personas
purposes,
involucradas en
everyone who was
organizaciones de la
involved
economía
in the
social
organization of
que
social
busquen otro
circular
espacio de
economies that
participación
were
que las
trying to
reconozca
find
desde
other
su identidad y su
spaces so that
pertenencia
their
al partido,
identities were
de las
acknowledged
características
as
de
well
lo que
as
significa
the
vivir
features of
en
what
un
it
territorio
means to
peruano.
live in a
Hablamos de
suburban
mujeres
area. We're
perurbanas
speaking
por dos
about
motivos.
women
Por un
for
lado,
two reasons. On the
reconocer
one
las
hand,
identidades
to
de género,
acknowledge the
los
gender
roles de género
identities,
y
the
la
gender
reproducción de
roles,
estos roles
and the
en los
reproduction of
escenarios y en
those
los territorios
roles
donde nos encontramos
in the
trabajando.
places where we work in.
Hablamos de periurbano
We
porque
speak of peri-urban
tiene que
or
ver con, por
suburban
un lado, el
because it has
avance
to
de
do,
un tipo
on
de
the one
campo, el
hand,
campo
with
hegemónico, el campo
we
vinculado
were opposing
al
the hegemonic
agronegocio y a la
field that is related to
explotación de la
agribusinesses and the
agricultura
exploitation
en
of
estos términos
agriculture
hegemónicos de acumulación
in
de
the
recursos.
hegemonic
Y por
terms
otro
of
lado, también el
capitalistic
avance
accumulation.
de
And it's
las
also
urbes, ¿no?
about
La urbanización también bajo un modelo hegemónico
to work
que tiene que ver
in
con
those
un
urban areas in
extractivismo
when there's
urbano
also
que
urban
está asociado a
extractivism
las
activities
acumulaciones vinculadas a las
related to
ciudades, ¿no? Y a las
accumulation
grandes y
in the
megas
cities.
ciudades. Y entonces el periurbano
Therefore,
vendría a identificar una
peri-urban
interfaz
identifies
en el
the
que resultan
interface in which
características
there are
específicas vinculado
specific
a
features that are
el suelo,
connected to
vinculado
the
al acceso
soil,
del
to
suelo,
access
al
to the
acceso al
soil,
suelo para vivienda y al
access to the
acceso
soil
del
to
suelo
have
para la
houses
producción.
and
Y por otro lado
production from the
también
soil. And on
las
the other hand, it's also
dimensiones y
about speaking
geografías,
about
cómo
the
se van
dimensions, the
ubicando
geographies,
y
and how
cuáles son
this
el
is taking
tránsito que
place
hacen
and
las
what is
personas,
it,
cuál es la
how
circulación de las
people
personas,
move from
cuáles
one
son
place
las
to another,
dinámicas de las
their
comunidades
mobility, what
y
are the
cómo algunos
dynamics of the
territorios quedan
communities, and how
segmentados y
there are
aislados
certain
entre
territories that are
fincas
left
productivas,
isolated or
barrios
segmented
privados y
because
un
of
avance de dos fronteras que
urban
confluyen en el
developments or
periurbano.
productive areas and how
Entendemos también
they
que en los
are
escenarios rurales y
connected. We
periurbanos
understand that
resulta
rural and
difícil las
peri-urban
expresiones de las
scenarios
diversas
make it
identidades de
very
género.
difficult for the different
Hoy
gender identities
identificamos
to
un grupo de
thrive. We have
mujeres con el
identified
cual
now a group
trabajar
of
y a
women with
partir de ahí
which we're working,
empezamos a
and
trabajar
as of
en
then
lo que
we
tiene que
started
ver
working
con
in
los
everything that's
roles
related
vinculados
to
al género.
the roles
El
connected to
trabajo de
gender.
cuidados muchas veces
Care
destinado
work
y en su
many
mayoría a las
times is
niñeces y
mostly
también
done
a muchos
by women
adultos mayores,
and by
en
the
donde
elderly
el
women
rol de estas
also.
mujeres a
And the role
veces
of
es
these people
priorizar
is
ese
sometimes
trabajo
to
por sobre
set
sus deseos y
a
motivaciones
priority to care for
personales.
others above
Esto
their own
impacta en
personal
el hábitat,
desires.
en el
So
momento
this
de
has an
querer
impact in
trasladarse,
the
circular por el
environment, because
espacio
when they
y
want to
poder
move,
acceder a todos
have
estos
mobility
servicios,
in the space and have
bienes
access to
y espacios
services, goods,
comunitarios en
and
donde
community
tienen que decidir
areas,
entre el
they need
espacio
to
público y el
decide
espacio
whether
privado.
they keep
En el
their
contexto de
private
pandemia también
ticket
hemos
into the public,
identificado
or
que se
how to
ha
deal with that. In the pandemic, we have identified
multiplicado
that
las
there's been a
estrategias
growth
de
in terms
cuidado
of the
en este
care
contexto
strategies
para poder
because of the
afrontar el
context,
aislamiento,
so
el
as to be able
confinamiento y
to
para poder
face the
afrontar el
isolation of the
cuidado
lockdown
sosteniendo
and offer care
escolaridades y
activities,
sosteniendo
schooling
la
activities,
salud de
as well as
todos
looking
los
after the
integrantes de la
health
familia.
of all of the family members.
En ese marco
It
nos
is in this
encontramos con
framework
muchas
that we
mujeres
have
que sin
found many
realizar una
women
actividad productiva y
who
viviendo en
are
algunos de estos
working
barrios
or living
aledaños
in
al
the
centro de Pilar
neighborhoods
se
near
encontraban
Pilar,
motivadas de
and they felt the need,
participar,
they were
interesadas, se
encouraged to
encontraban
participate, they
interesadas
were
en participar
interested in
con otras
participating
mujeres
with
de
other
un proyecto
women to
productivo que
have a
significara algún
work
ingreso
project
al
that
grupo
could
familiar. El
give an
proyecto
extra income for
entonces
the
entendemos
family.
que se
So the
ubica
project, we
y se
understand,
destina
it
no
is placed
únicamente a
and it
las
is
mujeres productoras del
devoted not only
periurbano, sino
for
también
women
a
in the
las
peri-urban
realidades de su
area,
grupo
but it's also
familiar,
addressing
las
the needs of those
niñeces
family
que
groups
están
for
bajo
the
su
children
cuidado,
they are
también
looking after.
a
And it
las
is also about
características y al aspecto comunitario, cómo
building a
trascendemos un
community.
proyecto
How do we
productivo, un proyecto
transcend
de un
a
grupo de mujeres que significa
project of a group of
transformaciones
women
cualitativas
that is
al
creating a
espacio comunitario, a
qualitative
la participación
transformation in the
comunitaria,
community, engaging the community to
a las
participate
actividades que
and
desarrollan
to
estas
get them
mujeres en
involved in
otros
the
espacios y
activities
en otros
developed in
escenarios
other
y
areas, in
cómo
other
esto puede ser el
scenarios, and how
germen de
this
una
could
nueva instancia
be the seed
organizativa que no
for a new
solamente
type of
involucre un grupo de
organization that
mujeres
is not
bajo un
only
proyecto productivo,
involving
sino que
women
involucre un
in a
grupo de
certain project,
mujeres
but
que se
it goes
conforma en
beyond
red,
that.
que
Women
piensa
who
el
are getting
aspecto
organizing,
comunitario y
creating
que
networks, creating a
en ese
community.
territorio y en esa
And
comunidad
so in
pueden
this
trascender
community,
a
they can
pensar las
transcend and
redes
start
comunitarias
thinking
que
about
necesitamos para
community
el
networks that are
desarrollo y la
needed
calidad de
for the
vida de
development and
todas
for
las
improving the
identidades de
life
género
quality
que
of
lo
all of the
habitan, ¿no?
gender
Que este
identities that live
espacio
in the
pueda ser
area.
de
Let's
intercambio,
hope
de
that this
reflexión
area
y
is
a su
for
vez
a
de
space for reflection,
resignificación
for
a partir del
reframing things,
reconocimiento y la visibilización de
by
estas mujeres
acknowledging the
con una
visibility of
actividad y
women
con una propuesta
through
que
their
las
work,
tenga como
through their
protagonistas.
proposals, where they are center stage with the Aroma Network, Verde Aroma.
Thank you very much, Nadine, for that. Very interesting reflections, especially coming from that peri-urban context. I'm sure we'll have more to share and reflect on after we have the other two remaining videos. So the second one is from CEDEPO. CEDEPO is the Center for Education, Production, and Agroecological Resources. So in the video, you will hear from Claudia. Claudia is the current president, and we'll also hear from Alicia, who's the founder of CEDEPO. So they will reflect on initiatives that promote caring for the environment and for each other. So they will share two key initiatives initiatives. One is the House of Seats, and the second one is the Community Health Center. So let's see the Depo video.
Cuando nosotros llegamos a la zona,
When we
como
first
buenos
got in this
educadores,
area as good
lo que
educators that
pensábamos
we are, what
construir
we
acá
thought
era
is that we
una escuela
wanted to
de
build
educación
a school
con orientación agrotécnica, ¿no? Pensando en eso en
for
realidad.
agricultural matters. That
Cuando
was
nos
our
salimos a
goal.
presentar a la comunidad, a
So
visitar a los
when we
vecinos,
went and
nos
visited
dimos cuenta
the
que esa
neighbors,
necesidad no
we
estaba instalada en la
realized
comunidad.
that this is not
La
something
comunidad lo
that
que
the
necesitaba
community
eran como dos
needed.
cosas muy
The
importantes que tenía que
community
ver con
needed
el
two
trabajo,
things that had to do with
cómo poder
job
abastecerse de la
sources
tierra, cómo darle valor a la
and
producción
how
de la
to
tierra.
value the
Muchos
production
no
of the
eran
land.
productores, la
Many of
mayoría
them were
criaba
not
ganado o
agricultural
chancho,
workers. They would raise cattle or pigs.
con esa experiencia hortícola, sino que era gente que estaba
They didn't
expulsada
have
del
the
conurbano
experience
bonaerense,
of
otras
working the
provincias que vinieron a
land
instalar
to
acá.
have a agricultural
Entonces salía muy fuerte el
production.
tema de la producción en relación
So
al trabajo
we
y
needed
la
to
salud.
do work in
Por
terms of
tanto,
how to
como
promote the
metodología
production
también
and
es
to look after
desarrollar
the health of
propuestas
everyone. So we
que
came up
la
with a
sigan
plan to
adelante la
come
misma comunidad,
to
dejar
have the
esas capacidades
community
instaladas
make
dentro de la
up
propia comunidad
proposals
para
and
que los
leave the
vecinos se hagan
community
cargo
with
de
all
esos
the
proyectos y los lleven adelante.
skills in which they could get organized by themselves. When we started here, there was not even grass here. It was arid land. It was dying. The land was dying because this had been a brick factory. So
éramos casi todos docentes.
All of us, we were teachers. So we came and we started teaching young people and adults, and we did a diagnosis of the community, and we noticed that there was a lot of malnourishment. So we started with pedagogical programs that were related to good nourishment and food production. So for so many years, it was not by chance that it's always been the women. In 10,000 years of history, it's always the women who look after, who do the raising, who do the improving, who do the healing. All of the knowledge to look after people's health has brought us the choice to see what is it that we can produce to heal ourselves, to feed ourselves, to share with one another. So La Casa de la Semilla, or the House of Seeds, as that would be literally translated, this is how the project was created. Minca is a group of women who took it upon ourselves to have a high quality production of seeds. When the season begins, we decide who's going to sow what, and we communicate and we send each other pictures of, look, I got a new little stem. And this is how we accompany one another, and then we do the harvest and we share the lessons learned, what happened with the division of labor, and if it worked well, and what to change about it. The big corporations of the world, they are everywhere, all around the world, implementing their structural frameworks, illegal frameworks, with the judges on their side, so as to be able to legitimate the exploitation, the expropriation of our seeds. So this is paramount. Each organization needs to have a specialist so that we can produce quality seeds on our own. So this is for us a grounding experience. I feel so free because I am no longer depending on others. And for us, our seeds is like our children. We look after them with a lot of love. We fertilize them, we water them, we see them grow. The producers are free. They can heal themselves with their own seed production. They can build their homes when the seeds become trees. The more we are in this exchange of seeds and of knowledge and of experiences, the better nourished we will be. I'm so proud of this place and everything these women do.
La propuesta del programa de desarrollo
The
local
proposal of the
sustentable
local sustainable development program that has to do, or that is connected to the health center, it is a community health center,
hoy en día gestionado un poco con,
which
de
is
parte del
managed
municipio, que da algunos,
partly
garantiza
by the
algunos de los
municipality
programas de
that is
salud,
helping
pero
sponsor
principalmente es el
some of
equipo
the
de
health
salud,
programs,
las
but
promotoras
basically
de salud de la
it is
comunidad, las que
a
llevan
team of
adelante la
workers from the
propuesta.
communities that are
Se trabaja
making this move
principalmente
along. So the
educación para la
work is
salud,
around health
mucho espacio de
education.
formación para el tema
We
de
do a
la
lot of
prevención
teaching to prevent
y mucho
diseases.
trabajo
And
territorial
we
de
also do a lot of
capacitación de
work with the
compañeras
communities
vecinas
to
de la
train
zona
them, to
que
bring
se
the
forman
neighbors
como promotoras
along
de salud que están
so that they can learn and
atentas
teach others.
a su
Women
comunidad en cualquier
who
demanda que
are looking after
que
the
aparezca.
community's
Entonces nosotros
needs.
decimos que
So
no
we
son
say that
solamente las
it
personas
is
o las
not
promotoras
only
que trabajan en el centro de
the
salud,
people who
sino
work
que
in the health
compañeras que
center, but
viven en la
also the
comunidad y que están
sisters who
atentas a
work
las
in the
necesidades
communities that are
de las
looking
familias de
after
la
the
zona.
needs of all the
El centro
families
de
in
salud
the area.
tiene
The health center
450
has
historias clínicas
450
familiares.
clinical records of families.
Cuando se convoca, porque nosotros cuando se
So
llegó a la comunidad,
when we got to this
nosotros
community
como
for the
CEDEPO
first
teníamos que
time, we as a
programar con la
depot, we
idea
had a
de
program
pensar a largo
with
plazo
the
en un
idea of
espacio
thinking in the long
sustentable para
term
la
of having a
organización.
sustainable place for organization
Y cuando
needs.
llegamos a la comunidad,
So
como buenos
when we
educadores
got into the
comunitarios, o sea,
communities
también
as
estaba el hecho de
educators, as
trabajar con la
teachers we
comunidad.
are, we
Y
engaged the
teníamos esta
community as
casita
soon
que
as
era muy
we
precaria
had this
y hasta
very
que se
humble
pusiera en
house.
condiciones como para armar un
So we
centro de
had to
salud, no iba a
repair
haber
it to
tiempo
make
como
it a
para
health
desarrollar la
center.
propuesta
In the
también.
meantime, we're also
La gente
developing
en menos
our
tiempo
work
de lo que nosotros
program.
esperábamos
But it
puso
took
en condiciones
shorter than we
esta-
expected because
este
the
centro
people
de salud.
helped us to
Trajo su cortina de su
rehabilitate the
casa,
house.
no
Some
sé, el
of the people
cuaderno,
donated their
un
curtains
montón de insumos para poder
or
garantizar la atención a sus vecinos.
notebooks. They
De ahí
gave
nace el
them
hecho de que,
all.
bueno,
And
a
this
ver,
is why
formemos las compañeras, sobre todo mujeres,
we decided that
formemos
it
las
was
compañeras como
a good
promotoras de
idea
salud para que
to
lleven adelante la propuesta.
train future
En
trainers so that
atención
this
tenemos
could
un
live
solo
on.
médico clínico ahora. Y después, bueno, el centro de salud está abierto 3
So
veces a la semana.
the
Entonces se
health
otorga
center opens
medicación, que
3
por suerte
times
podemos
a
mantener el
week.
programa Remediar.
We
Y
prescribe
hay 3
medications,
compañeros del
and
equipo que
we
están dentro
have
del programa de médicos
3
comunitarios, entonces pueden garantizar
community
también un
doctors
salario
who are there, and we are
después está todo el espacio de lo que
chipping
son
in
los
to
niños
provide the
adolescentes,
salary.
que,
And
bueno,
then there's a
acá en la
space for
zona no hay
children and
iglesia, no hay
teenagers.
club,
Since there are
no
no
hay esquina donde se
churches
puedan juntar
here,
los pibes.
there's no place for
Entonces el centro de
young
salud
people
pasó a
to
ser un
meet.
espacio
The
social
health center
también, de
is also
reunión, de encuentro
their
de los
gathering
jóvenes, de los
place.
adolescentes,
This
de
is
las
where
mujeres.
young people,
Y
women
ahí se
come
crea
and
un
meet.
espacio donde también funciona que los pibes vienen acá a construir comunidad.
And so this is where the community is being built.
Thank you very much. Another very interesting video. A lot of exciting or really informative experiences being shared there. So our last, but not least, definitely not least, our next video is from Africa, the story from Africa. So which will shed light on women's engagement with household and community sanitation in several neighborhoods in St. Louis, which is in Senegal. So this is presented by Penda Dio from the Observatory Gender and Development of St. Louis, Senegal. And it was produced with support from the Project Overdue, which is tackling sanitation taboo across urban Africa. Penda, and I think we also have a video, if I'm not wrong, so please proceed.
ku góor ki day takkal ku jigéen ki day takkal te ku doog ba pare ba jóg war nga mën a xëcc chaise bi bu fekkee am na chaise nga mu wàcc mu vidéo wala boog nga jël soo bi nga vidé ko mu dem.
non ñun suñu dëkk moom jigéen ñay defar góor ñi xalaatuñu sax yàq ba defar da ngay wala da ngay defar ñu ñëw yàq dem seen yoon.
suñu kër de ñu góor ñi daañ ko defar certes bu fekkee kii bi bouché na kano bi bouché na mais ñu jigéen ñi ñoom ñoo koy defar.
suñu kër toilette yi fi am mooy genre toilette yi moderne yi chaise anglaise chasse ak lavabo et tout famille la noonu nekkuma sama kër bopp famille la toilette yi xanaa ñun jigéen ñi ñoo ko res ñoo koy defar.
jigéen moo war a xëy
bale këram ba mu set mu fobee rek doog a jublu ci taalam añam ak yooyu sanga xale yi defar kër gi ba mu baax ku ñëw moom doo ko doon góor a ko war a def jigéen gannaaw moo ko war a def léegi nag bu ko ci borom këram mënee jàppale wutal ko jànq ba tey baax na su fekkee doolam yeggu caatam yow mi nga xam ne yaa ni ci kër gi yaa ko war a seer yaa ko war a defar ba mu baax.
jigéen moo war a yow fajar teel bale kër gi ba mu set raxas duus yi mais nekkul jigéen kese ko war a def góor yàlla moom war na ko def ndax jigéen am na fu muy toll du attan doole bi du mën a liggéey yooyu quoi góor ko mën a def.
jigéen ki moo ko war a seere mu wut ay liggéeykat yu koy defaral moo koy menacé waaye duus yi moom dañ koy ba oto bi moo koy ngacc suuf loolu suñu soog am duus kii koy génn yóbbu dex ga loolu mooy suñu jàngit ay xale yi ñooy menace nga wut ay boo xam nga wut ay taalibe fu la fompal nga fay ko góor ñi bu ñu xëyee dañuy liggéey dañuy amee kër gi póot meeg paase meeg menace beeg togg geeg yëpp bu la ko xale yi jàmm ko man nga wut ko la ko jàppale mu defaree nag wana ko simple la ñu am ñu carré ndax bëgg na yu toog kay toog si kaw bëgg nañ ko ay moyen bi ma amul moyen sama kër man da koy toppatoo ndax xale bu góor bu ma fobee rek wala xale bu ma raxtaan rek am ma kenn mënut ko fay ki ma fay fay rek douze bi feesam kër ku ma ko ngaccee rek kon daañu menace ba 6 heures daañu menace kër gi ba 6 heures lu pare suba ak ngoon 5 heures 8 heures 5 heures 8 heures weer de ko xale bu góor bu jël weer de mooy fomp weer de nga fay ñetti junni boo tourné mu nga fay menacé suba si nga fay ko téeméer bu ngoonee nga fay ko téeméer donc leen jël bu leen nga fay leen tourné bu leen nga jël ba weer de am na ko sax baa doole nga xamul nooy def
li war a gérer fii mooy jigéen ñi rek ndax ñoom ñoo ne fii ci kër gi ñun bu ñu xëyee dañuy dem liggéeyi waaye ñoom ñoo fi des douche publique ak salle de bain yi ñoo fi ne ñaari wanag la yi koy toppatoo mooy sama doom yi ci biir kër gi
xale yi ñooy raxas douche bi saa seen yaay yi raxas sama doom fi nekk samay doom laa fa nekk ak samay sët xale yi raxas saa wala seen yaay raxas.
mais bu fekkee comme Sénégal société bi ni mu tëddee woo jigéen lañ ko jagleel mais bu jëmee ci wàllu force yi nag góor ñi parce que ñoo am force bi. te fii nii booy xool ñoom dañu jël tâche ménagère yëpp daal di koy jagleel jigéen parce que nee nañu jigéen dafa war a nekk femme au foyer moo tax lu ñëw rek ci kawam lay daanu.
xam nga góor ñi rëy na rëy koo xam ne mën na dugg ci duus def lañ ci def waaye duñ ko raxas waaw xam dañu rëy si loolu. lu jagleel xale yi ñuy raxas defar douche ba mu set daal ñuy raxas douche ba mu set góor ñi moom kon ca raxasal douche man xam daal ndax man maa lay raxasal douche waaw moom ay jigéen ñi fi nekk jigéen ñi defar.
may raxas douche yi toppatoo suñu kër parfois xam maa fi nekk samay rakk yi mënuñu liggéey affaire yi maa nekk fii ba fabee da yëkkati lu takk ma xool lu takk ma raxas douche yi toppatoo lu fi takk ma defar.
je le fais en tant que femme parce que góor ñi duñu teel a jóg te man maay njëkk jóg d'abord comme man maay njëkk jóg moo tax man maa koy defar ndax su ma yeewoo le matin de très bonne heure ndax douche moo njëkk le temps ngay nekk ci say sangu say jàpp ak say julli yooyu tu es obligé nga defar douche yi balaa nit ñi di yeewu ndax il faut que ça soit propre d'abord moo tax balaa nit ñi di jóg il faut douche bi ñu defar ko ñun suñu douche bu fattee ñun jigéen ñi ñoo ko jël en charge defar ka parce que góor ñi dañuy xëy dañuy liggéeyi ñun ñoo fay des ñoo fa nekk tey bu fekkee ni diw moo moomee ki moomee mooy raxas du parce que premièrement man maay njëkk raxas mais ki nga xamante ni moom moomee raxas douche fu 10 heures jotee wala 11 heures ba xale yeeg mag ñi sangu ba pare instant boobu dañ koy raxas boyal andu bi teg ko suur ka ndax ki moome kooku mooy chargé def loolu.
waaw bu fekkee entretien la moom il faut que nga dégager benn budget teg ko noonu à côté soit ci boutique bi nga koy teg wala nga jox ko kenn ci kër gi koo xamante ne loolu rek lay gérer pour ñu jënd li nga xamante ne moo koy entretenir les produits.
ndax parfois dina am ay saltements yu fi ne nga bale toon yi defar madaar eau de javel ndox raxas kaw suuf après nga lenkani daal di demaat ci beneen bi raxas parce que fii ñaari douche la damay dem defar ndox omo eau de javel daal di dugg raxas génnaat.
ñun nag suñu kër moom dañoo ñeme raxas mais dinañ ko raxas au moins 2 fois par jour bu fekkee xale yi nekkuñu fa.
parce que dès l'instant yooyu yëpp day causer ay maladies microbes yi yooyu yëpp loolu moo tax parce que d'abord yenn saa yi daan nañu woo à l'époque Lamine bi nga xamante ni moo daan débouché même chaque fois bu fekkee da nga koy woo di ko fay chaque fois nga koy woo di ko fay léegi instant bi du lépp ngay mën a def di ko fay ñu ni li muy def mën nañ ko nan ko defal suñu bopp rek mu jeex.
parfois ma raxas fii bi sa pare xet bi day métti sama bopp.
douche boo fa demee pour entretenir ko maanaam di ko defar di ko raxas di ko nettoyer da nga war a am noo comporté woo maanaam noo soloo ci wàllu habillement parce que war nga sol gant war nga takk masque war nga am benn tenue bu nga xamante ne nii ak ay dàll yu nga xamante ne nii du bokk ak yow li ngay sol nii rek ni comme booy dem boutique ba wala ci kër gi ne.
formation boobu nag lanu amul parce que loolu formation boobu il faut nit ñi jàpp si aussi pour ñu war ko mun a am ndax ñun li nu gis rek mooy na biir kër gi set.
waaw 3 bi de sant yàlla rek ndax yàgg na ba mu yàqoo waaye nag mbiru jaboot ak jamono rek boo xoolee ni mu demee sax xam ni nga boole kaak ay xale yu ndaw moom ak mag mu mënul dara sant yàlla rek waaye comme am bi demewul noonu moom loo am rek dangay sant yàlla loolu rek moo tax boobu ba léegi defaluñu ko.
àggal nga pompe douce pour mu kii xet gi di neex.
ñun loolu mooy suñu problème li nu gis mooy loolu en ce que ndox bi bañ a couler bañ a dugg si néeg yi wala bañ a occuper diggu kër gi aussi ñun loolu la ñu gis des fois aussi di ngay gis bi nga xamante ni fosse bi day nekk si buntu kër gi bu nekkee si buntu kër gi non seulement lii tilim si mbedd mi yëpp day duggaat si biir kër gi te loolu aussi bokkul si hygiène bokkul si hygiène bokkul si wér-gi-yaram bokkul si dara tout le temps xet gu bon da lay bëgg rey cuuraay ak yëpp si bokk yam xale yi di feebar mag ñi di feebar surtout bu fekkee dafa am 3e âge unique si biir kër gi présence su yooyu day ñëw moustiquaire yooyu yëpp ba pare daf lay jox yeneen frais surplus yoo xamante ni doo bokkul woon si sa dépense journalière.
sama kàcc amul assainissement bokkuñu sax si Promoville bi fii nag moom le plus souvent nan la ñuy vider da ngay gis ku gas buntu këram sotti ka fa te mu nekk lu dangereux lu nga xamante ne nii déjà baaxul ci santé ñi koy def baaxul ci santé xale yi fay foye parce que xale yi amuñu fu dul seen buntu kër nga gas sa fosse daal di koy teg sa buntu kër xale bi daal di ñëw di si foo ci foofu xamoo yan jàngoro la ko mën a jural te jamono ji dañ nekk jamono ji nga xamante ne heure boo xëyee suba am na jàngoro bu nga xamante ne nii rek xamoo ko waaye mi ngi lay wut si te tamit yemuñu foofu rek dex gi géej gi dex gi dañ siy napp géej gi dañ siy napp te suñu ay doom rek ñoo siy sangu imagineel dex gi da ngay gis xale yi nekk ñii ci boor bi di sangu nga gis ku jël ay kiiwam foosam daal di ko siy sotti wala mbalitam daal di ko siy sotti loolu noonu xale bi mi ngi sangu te mi ngi naan ci ndox mi c'est forcé boo ciy naan doo ko tey bëggoo ko mais doo ko tey.
Thank you so much. Quite insightful experiences from Senegal, and really a lot of lessons or experiences shared on this sanitation taboo that presents across urban Africa. So at this juncture, I will open the floor for question and answer. just for us to reflect to the four presentations stemming from Dr. Kaida's presentation, to Sedepo, Sedeka, and of course the experience from Senegal. So if there's any question, please feel free to raise your hand or unmute and ask the question, as we have some of the speakers within this session. So please, if there's any question or any reflection.
I think Abdel Maula has his hand up.
Sorry, I can't. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't see it.
هل أنا المطلوب أتحدث في المولد؟ هلا ألو؟
Yes.
مساء
Hi,
الخير
please go
عليكم.
ahead.
Good evening. Thank you very much for these presentations. I hope before anything, I know that they are on the Google Drive, but also I wish to be sent by email, particularly the ones by PowerPoint that was presented by my colleague in Yemen and the others. I have just some comments, quick comments. First, on the Yemen experience, I was hoping to have reference to the relationship of women to accessing land, agricultural inputs, seeds, things like that. The percentage of women working in agricultural field, because the presentation was a horizontal one, talking about women in general and the situation in general. I was hoping for there to be more focus on the situation of women in the relationship with agriculture, their right to access land, and the relationship of women with the problems having to do with inheritance and other issues. With relation to the presentation about the video about the solidarity economy, I think these experiences are very beneficial, and I hope that those organizing work and on women in Egypt, this is useful in this co-learning space to exchange these experiences, because we have in Egypt a network for solidarity economy. Most of them are women. I hope there we can communicate together to exchange these experiences, whether with relation to medicinal plants and also with relation to seeds, because we are working mainly, part of our experience, we are working on the issue of seeds and the exploitation on part of major companies like Monsanto, Syngenta. There is an exploitation, an expropriation of all seeds in Africa, in Latin America, in the MENA region. I believe it's very important, the idea of having a mechanism for communication together in order to become partners in this kind of activity, whether to exchange these experiences and disseminate them on our websites. We can share our experiences and try to translate them into Spanish or English, and at the same time to receive your experiences and disseminate them on a large scale, because they are very beneficial, very useful as experiences that we can exchange, and at the same time we can use this partnership on how to defend women's rights to access land, women's rights to build institutions that express and reflect them, such as solidarity networks, and their rights to seeds and access to seeds as a first part. The production of seeds in our region in Egypt, for example, there are all women. So exchanging such experiences is a necessity, and I believe that we should gather all of these experiences as part of the social production of our combined work in this joint space. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Absolutely. That is the main purpose and the main vision for this kind of co-learning space is to always and see how best to learn from experiences from different areas. And I think we will take it up very seriously to see how to make it easier for the mainstreaming of some of the upcoming or emerging issues within this context. Dr. Trush, I don't know if you have any reflections that you may want to share in relation to the question that has been posed, and that's about the women and agriculture and women and access to land within the context of Yemen. I don't know if you have any reflections at this moment.
نعم شكرا جزيلا للزميل الذي طرح الملاحظة.
Thank you very much to the colleague and to you all. In the presentation, I specified the percentage of women working in agriculture. In one of the figures, about 51% of the total women working without pay in rural areas are working in agriculture. It's a very short time. And this meeting addressed two important topics, one having to do with reproductive health, and it's a very sensitive issue, and requires a serious stance. I was keen as much as possible in this presentation to give the most important data that reflect the nature of the situation, the current situation in Yemen with relation to reproductive health, and I reached some recommendations, and I almost had an argument with my colleague Marina Kamal from Yemen. I was asking that HIC adopt an international UN resolution to have reproductive health, to provide it for free, to oblige all countries to provide free such care, because a lot of women die because they haven't received any care. I hope that this recommendation is taken into consideration. The other topic was unpaid work. This work is complicated. It's very difficult to pull it apart from other issues because women are the ones who work on herding cattle. They are the ones who bring the firewood. They are the ones who do the agriculture work. There is a picture of a pregnant woman that I showed. She was in her last months of pregnancy carrying water on her head. This is a difficult situation. If we can have a meeting or a session dedicated particularly in this co-learning space about unpaid work that women do, we can expand and provide more info. And also another meeting having to do with reproductive health in order for these meetings to produce some outputs that can be raised to countries, for these countries to put them into, take them into consideration in their plans to achieve the maximum to protect women against the risks of pregnancy and birth. This is, in short, my intervention with relation to the two topics and the question that my friend posed from Egypt.
Thank you very much, Dr. Trush. Thank you for that. So we will have Irene. I believe Irene also had a question. And then after that, I'll bring in Sylvia, just to respond to a question that was raised by Claudia in the chat space. And then if there's any, I'm sorry, I cannot see if you have raised your hand, but I'll just check. And then after that, you can have any other questions that may follow up. So Irene, please take the floor.
Thank you. Am I clear? Diana, can you hear me?
Yes, you're clear.
Oh, okay. So my name is Irene, and I had a question to both Mr. Arrush and also the video that was projected on the Senegal case. And mine was for the case in Yemen. I wanted to ask about the place of key institutions, for example, the trade unions, especially in matters governing equal rights for the women, especially when Mr. Rush spoke about the issue about 100 men, about 100 men being unpaid, which is represented by about 400 women. So I wanted to know about the place of the trade unions in Yemen. And for the Senegal case, I just wanted to ask on whether we have institutions that are focused on looking at the place of gender and equality matters. For example, part of the video, I noticed that the women were talking about the lack of access to key materials that they can use to clean these facilities, for example, the gloves. And the question on where is the place of, for example, in the Kenyan context, we have the Ministry of Gender. Do we have such institutions, and what are they doing about that kind of situation in the country? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene. I'll invite Penda to respond to the question that Irene has posed about the Senegal context, as Dr. Trush also prepares to share his reflections. Thank you. Penda is, I don't know if Penda is still with us.
Yes. Yes, thank you so much. Do you want to know what the unions are doing in women's rights? In Senegal, we have unions for working rights, and also we have NGOs, many of them that are here to advocate for women's rights. They create a lot of awareness, particularly regarding women's health. And they give a lot of advice to women. Regarding governance, we have a law for parity that give you the possibility of being elected, but full parity is not a reality. We have made great progress on, particularly NGOs and women that are fighting for their rights. Regarding these institutions, to have access to cleaning products or sanitation products, we have women that have access to health through a universal health. In Senegal, the problem that we are facing is to have access to sexual and reproductive health. They don't like to talk about those topics because those are the type of topics that are not dealt in depth. They're dealt with very superficially. That is what I wanted to say for now.
Thank you so much, Penda, for that. And also just in continuing that kind of conversation, especially on that kind of balance, I wanted to bring in Sylvia to respond to a question that was asked by Claudia in the chat. So, and as well, and Claudia can as well share if she wants to unmute and speak. But the question was really in terms of in relation to the two videos that were shared by Sedeka and Sedepo, and it's about. At the end, we see sort of men all changing or women taking up roles, being involved more. Does that mean that there's a rebalancing of tasks, or what does that mean in terms of the context that we are speaking with? So I'd want Sylvia to just speak in relation to that so that we can understand better then what does it mean in terms of is the context changing or are women taking up their space more effectively? Sylvia?
Hola, sí, ¿qué tal? No entendí muy bien la pregunta. Acá estoy estamos Silvia y Macarena.
I'm sorry. This is Silvia Macarena. I didn't understand the question. Can you translate it in the chat to Spanish? But if you look at are you hearing interpretation so that you can understand questions and then you can respond in Spanish and there will be interpretation? Do you see that option, Sylvia? You can see an option that says participants, responses. Can you see that below? So there in interpretation, you can pick languages. I did put Spanish, but where was the question that was asked? No, this is for hearing interpretation. So perhaps she needs to hear the question again.
Okay. So the question is that the videos from Sedeka and Sedepo, both of them show women getting involved and more empowered in the end. So the question is, are the men changing their attitudes in the actions in the field of care, or are women's schedules filling up without rebalancing the tasks? I think it's just about trying to see, is there a change of context from when women were not getting involved in the economy and all that? So what is changing? What is facilitating some sort of change for women to participate in different spaces and particularly within the social economy? I don't know if that is clear for Sylvia.
Sí, es clara. En principio, el proyecto está el de Verde.
Well, in our project with Sedeka, we have the Scent of Green project. And the idea is to increase production of alternative medicines and commercialize them, and working with women who are located in peri-urban areas in Buenos Aires, so in the outskirts of the city. And so they're working with children. And when you have a production project, there's always workshops. There's ideas of how to use and how to produce materials, but there's also a physical space so that women can bring their children with them. And we are also offering activities for play and entertainment of children so that there is also a care element at that moment, because we're always trying to think about this idea of care. For example, trying to generate spaces that have care present between women who are producers and agricultural workers, so that they have spaces that are also spaces that take care of their children. But also the idea is, how can we invite or not their partners, their spouses of these women producers, so that they could participate or not in the workshops? That's always a question, to begin to talk about these issues, talking about the overload of work, for example. I don't know if another person would like to speak. Yes, my sister. I just wanted to add a little bit to what Sylvia was saying, to my colleague Sylvia was saying. You know, women and the spaces for participation. It's not just in a productive space, but there's also reflection about these tasks around care. How often can we begin to ask ourselves and reflect, is this an idea that's just our responsibility? And always this is a questioning that we do in these processes. We try to question the roles that have been assigned. And this doesn't mean that women are always destined to work in the home with their children, but looking at how children might be able to identify themselves differently and how there could be a collective process. So there's also reflection and decision making and helping and working with women to begin to re-signify home relationships and looking at the women in a productive role. It is a process. It is a work process that doesn't give any sort of immediate results in just 1 year of work, but this is something that we're working on in our training process in home and family environments, because every Saturday there's an activity, and her being able to participate in that activity, even respecting her concerns, her fears regarding care, and the responsibility and challenges that she has in her family. And so this is also being addressed. So something that is part of this reflection phase, this does generate change, because, you know, a woman not being home at mealtime is a change for a family dynamic in many cases, that a woman in her home space and trying to work and trying to combine it with other tasks in her home and also have enough time to do her work is also transforming home dynamics. And on the other hand, women are able to visualize that having access to work, they must have recognition of care work as well, because they're the ones who are covering all of that kind of work. And so this is a recognition between themselves, but also translating that empowerment and their understanding of the work that they're carrying out to their home space and to other places where they might participate, other spaces, other initiatives, other work that they may have. So this leads to other collective or other types of community or other spaces. And so we are beginning to see how these reflections and ways of participating transmit to all these other spaces. And this means that people are not avoiding having to participate or are no longer able to take up a job. No, the idea is that is questioned. And so in their family units, what's really important is that this isn't the focus maybe of the work, but it is part of the reflection process. With other women, we're always valuing the work that other women also provide in a family environment. And these types of reflections come and go in the space of our workshop, in this collective space that we have, and we're always questioning ourselves where and how new reflections are coming up.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Sylvia, for that reflection. So I think we will hear from Nadia, and then maybe we can proceed to the next session after that. Nadia, you're welcome.
Hola, bueno. Nada, yo me quedé.
Hello. I was trying to write this in the chat too, and we've talked about sexual health, but from a reproductive lens. And again, if we're going to continue to think about cis women, rather think about people with desire. Women who are carrying out this function, it would seem that we could never run away from this concept of reproduction. So it's important to begin to think about sexual health that doesn't have to do with reproduction, where we're asking ourselves many different things as a result when you take off that lens. And it's a much broader look at sexual health. And so that was my opinion, and that was my reflection regarding the first presentation that we heard. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Nadia. And a lot of reflections also being shared in the chat. So also make sure to interact with that. I think as we continue or as we conclude the session later on, we can really bring them up more strongly. So at this point, then we will have, I will hand over to Adriana, who will bring in a very important aspect of planning and care. Where does care fall in the planning of the city, or in city making? How does planning get incorporated? So she will give us some few insights or some few remarks about that, and then we will have further discussions towards building this space on care and the woman. So Adriana.
Thank you so much, Diana. I'm just not sure if I'm using the right channel. Today I'm struggling a bit with my computer and the connection. So just let me first check that the interpretation is working, just in case I need to change. And apologies if I have to switch off at any point the camera, at least. It's just that there was a massive storm here yesterday, and yeah, connectivity seems to be a bit bad. But very happy to go for it. Well, first of all, I think that this last point put forward by Nadia is really important. No? How do we expand the conversation, no? And how sometimes, how do we really break those crystal walls and crystal ceilings that we were talking about in terms of what are really the problems that we are facing. And I think that the question of the relationship between planning and care, which I was asked to reflect a bit upon, is quite a good space or a good link or a good connection to think a bit about that. If we look at this relationship between planning and care and the city as a caring city, there has been a big transformation in that relationship, thanks only and thanks mostly to feminist approaches. That transformation hasn't gone far enough at all, and there is far more to push. So before I just share some ideas of where I think that some of that push needs to go, in what direction, I just want to share with you just a personal story. Back in the early 80s, I was trained as an architect and an urban planner in Argentina. And one of my first jobs soon after graduating was to conduct a comprehensive study of housing needs of elderly people, not elderly men and women, but elderly people in the city where I live at the time. And the study was to inform the social housing policy of the regional government, the state government of Buenos Aires. The interesting thing was that our mission was very much perceived as having to come up with housing deficit figures. That is, how many houses were to be built to meet the needs of the elderly. So numbers to numbers. And this is something that is still reproduced very much, no? Even when we talk about women needs and so on. And what we found was that policy and planning needed to address not just a housing deficit, but a caring deficit, a care deficit. We found that, for instance, that most elderly women in particular, but also men, had in fact some form of housing, but were struggling to heat and repair their homes. They were struggling to adapt them to the changing needs. They were struggling to overcome isolation and depression and to participate in communal life across, with different generations. At first, when we presented these conclusions or recommendations, I remember the provincial housing authorities didn't like it at all. And they just said to us, well, we just build houses. To which we responded, well, if you want to address housing rights, you have to do more than that. And after many negotiations, the outcome was a comprehensive program where the building of new housing units was, in the end, a very small component. The key axis of the program included plans for the rehabilitation, adequation, and maintenance of existing homes, waive charges for people and women and men to enhance access to energy for cooking and heating, communal kitchens, time banks, important, very time banks, and exchanges with schools. Yeah, you can? No?
Había dos traducciones en el español, pero ya está, pararon, gracias. Estaban superpuestas.
Ok. ¿Desde el principio, Alicia? O...
No, ahora sí, perdón, Adriana. Que
no hay ningún problema.
Era muy rico y no se entendía.
Lo siento. Okay, I recapitulate a bit. I was talking about the many things that happened as part of that initiative. Again, this is back in the 80s, so there is history behind many of these discussions, and the solutions were really not new housing units as initially proposed, but again, a set of batteries that have to do with as making cheaper access to energy for cooking and heating, of course, providing support for maintenance, adequation, and repair of existing houses, communal kitchens, time banks. I was highlighting the notion of time banks and exchanges with between elderly women and men, but also in schools, so combining different space and care at different stages, and much more. And there was, of course, some elements of social housing, but one important component and one important battle that we won at that time was to say, actually, you don't need to build a special social housing just for the elderly, but you need to build mixed social housing, mixed neighborhoods, because the care that flows within the city nurtures from that intergenerational component. So the key lessons that we learned were many, but just to bring a few that I think that are still central to this relationship between planning and care seen from a feminist perspective. I just want to put a few points on the floor for discussion. The first one is that formal planning typically works with the notion of an average citizen, and that citizen is typically male, able, and heterosexual. And this is highly problematic. Yeah, I remember even being taught about that. What do you mean about different citizens? There is one average citizen. We cannot cater for everyone's needs. Well, we need to. A second aspect connected to that is the fact that actually gender matters across the whole life cycle. I'm going to turn 60 very soon, and sometimes I keep on asking myself, when is that a woman stops being a woman? Why, suddenly we become the elderly or the youth and so on. In my view, there is not such a thing as the elderly and the youth. Gender still intersects through different generations, the way we live the city, the needs, the experiences, and the aspirations we have. And we still have to make that clear. It's not that sadly, which has become part of, a group that is obsolete within society and has to be, classified somewhere within cities. And of course, this is not about gender and age alone. It's about class, it's about sexual orientation, it's about religion, it's about mental and physical ability, tenure status, and much more. The second important thing, I think, is that just to perhaps think that, again, that something that came up a few times, women are not just users of the city to be considered in terms of needs. They are active contributors to care in cities. They make the city. And this is very important because I think that again and again and again, when we look at targets for gender equality and so on, we always find this idea that we need to meet, satisfy, address, tackle women's needs as if they were just needy in society. They don't just have needs. We have to listen to what needs they say they have, but they're also active contributors. And this clearly travels and forces us to really look at the productive and the reproductive roles in a continuum. Women don't just play a caring or reproductive roles within the household or the neighborhood, but they do that, supporting to a large extent also productive roles and the productive roles of many others within the city. The third point is that women clearly drive the caring city. So we know that cities can be sites of exclusion, brutal exclusion, but also sites where care is reproduced. And when we look at who is living, who is building the caring city, typically we will see women behind that, women behind communal kitchens, women behind community food groups, women behind time banks, and I could go on and on and on. However, what we also see is that, and this appears sometimes in the discussion today, that this idea that women drive the caring city is very often taken for granted, as if we were born to be carers in the city or in any settlement, in a peri-urban area, in a rural area, in any area. We were not born, women were not born. They are not carers because of any biological, distinction in the way they were born. Women are forced by social norms and by traditions, in many cases, to take a completely unbalanced and asymmetrical role in caring, in the role of care, women are also forced into that role because of the gaps left by the market and by the state. Women choose sometimes to also take that role, but we need to think about not naturalizing, not making that idea, not attributing, falling into that idea that actually, yes, women are carers by nature, and let them get on with that. And when we think about that as a choice, which is not always a choice, most of the time it's not a choice for women to be carers in all the fronts they are, we also need to think about the fact that carers need to be cared for. And this is something really important as well. How do cities care for the carers, for women as carers? And this is not just about reproductive health, or health with, support with the schooling and so on. It's far more than that. Just coming almost to an end, because I know that I'm taking a bit too long. Sorry for that. The care provided predominantly by women is not something that is just to be acknowledged. It's not just about saying, thank you very much, you are amazing, but calls for the recognition as political subjects. And when it comes to planning, this means that it's not just about drawing on women to fill in the gaps, as I was saying before, left by the state and the market, but about ensuring that they have a say and political power in decision-making and in public budgetary control. A feminist perspective has been and continues to push for a significant reinvention of planning systems. And this is happening across many things that we are witnessing: the 15-minute neighborhoods, again, the food collectives, the idea of town banks, participatory budgeting, and many other similar devices that together make cities caring and loving places to confront multiple forms of exclusion. But linking care and planning calls for a full reinvention of planning. And this also obviously is extended to policy. And this has to do with the recognition that planning, in this case, is not something just performed or practiced by those trained professionally for that purpose, or doing so from public or private organizations. Planning is, in fact, what, ordinary citizens and women, ordinary citizens, men and women, do on a daily basis. And this is a key way in which we really need to redefine what planning is about. And again, what is a political space for them within that wider consideration of what planning does. So I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adriana. A lot of great insights, and also just a bit into what would inform the fourth session. Just trying to see how do we build this feminist city? What are the insights we want to put in place to facilitate cities or urban spaces that are able to encourage women to participate within the same spaces. So that's quite insightful. I think at this point, I will hand over to Yolande, who will just also pick from where Adriana has taken off. Someone else is speaking. Okay, so Yolande will take us through a discussion on different advocacy strategies that will guide all these discussions that we've had today. So Yolande.
Thank you very much, Diana, and thank you to you all for such rich, thought-provoking, challenging contributions. I think in the diversity of contributions that we've heard, it sort of challenges us to think, so what do we do? We heard, I think the conversation, as I've been listening to it, it's sort of moving into this direction of what next, what can we do? How do we change policy? What is the change that we seek? And we are coming to the close this session. As Julia said at the beginning, time is never enough. I think there's just so much to really dig up from our discussions. We had initially envisioned to have a bit of a longer discussion together about advocacy action. How do we take this forward, and particularly how do we take these considerations forward cross-regionally? But I think it's actually quite opportune that we maybe don't have the time to talk about it now, because it gives us a week to just let the conversations and the thoughts that have been shared today, and the experiences particularly, sink in. And what I would like to suggest, together with Julia and the team, is that I'll share with you a question to think about during the week. And perhaps, Julia, we can then pick up on that question in the next session, our last session together, which is focused on advocacy, really, going from, looking at different possibilities of doing and of action and acting together. And particularly acting for change from a space of building social force. And I think this session has really given me a sense of a very strong social force being knit between us. So the question I'm going to share is, what are the advocacy strategies that we can adopt cross-regionally to recognize, redistribute, and give new value to the roles and responsibilities of women and diversities as carers? And we'll share that question on the Google Classroom. We can put it in the chat as well. Perhaps the Google Classroom is better, since I know we are almost closing. But I think as you consider this question over the coming week, think about also your work, perhaps your personal experiences, but what are there advocacy initiatives? Are there initiatives that you are part of or that you have come across that you can share with us next week? And I think what we've been thinking a lot about as HIC and as a global coalition is that our power and our social force really lies in connecting with each other cross-regionally. And behind these co-learning and advocacy spaces, the power is exactly what's happening here. And so we'd love to together start plotting some points and some strategies for cross-regional advocacy. And we'll also in the next session be sharing with you some concrete opportunities of what HIC is also doing and thinking about ahead of March, which is a big global advocacy month for feminist and women's priorities. So with that, I'll hand over to Julia just for the last few closing words. And I would really like to thank each one of you again for the contributions in the chat, for the spoken contributions.
Thank you, Yolanda, and thank you really to everyone for this very, I think, very vivid and also very diverse and very challenging discussion that we had during the session, and also I think in the spaces that just happened before on Classroom. So additional to what Yolanda just suggested about the question, I think I want to make 4 quick points. One is, again, to remind you of our advocacy calendar, where we ask you to fill in, again, like the dates that are important, that are coming up for you, to see if there are collaborations around the 8th of March or the month of March, or whatever else you might be planning. And the participant list, so that we can make sure that by the end of the 4th session, we really have all your details. We know what you're working on, which kind of projects, which kind of issues, and that we're able to, maintain the connection. The third thing I want to mention is that after the feminist co-learning space, there is another one which is starting in March, which is on multi-level advocacy strategies. So if you're interested in that, we can also put the link in the chat. The applications are open right now and are closing quite soon. And there's a lot of interest. So if you want to have a space, just go and write and register. And then the final part, which I think sustains and nurtures very much the question that Yolanda posed on the advocacy strategies, is that we want to collectively imagine what the feminist city could look like. And for that, we have also developed a sheet where you can, share whatever you feel the feminist city looks like, feels like, sounds like, either as a text, as a video, as an audio message, whatever kind of form you want to use to express yourselves. Please do that. And I know that this has been a lot of info in 3 minutes now, or 2 minutes. So don't worry, we'll again share that via email. So yeah, that you have enough time ahead of the next session to see and think about how you would like to contribute to this space beyond our really fascinating and interesting discussions that are always, I feel like, too short and give us a lot to process for the next week. Are there any other questions? Any concerns, any ideas that you want to share before we close for today? Yolanda, yes.
Juliet, I'm just reminded of how much we appreciate hearing your feedback as participants. It's the first time actually in this setting that we are offering a co-learning space like this as HIC, and so really if you have reflections, I know Julia's mentioned in the previous sessions that we have a little sort of reflection evaluation questionnaire that we share, but also on the Google Classroom stream. Feel free to post reflections or to email us also personally. Yeah, it's always really helpful to hear how you experience the space.
Okay, with that, thank you so much, especially to our guests and everyone who has contributed videos, texts. Thank you so much also to our interpreters who are just making this space possible at all, and the conversations that we're having. And to everyone who joined us again, and to everyone who joined us for the first time as well, feel free to come again for the next session. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much, Julia.
Ciao. Hola, Adriana.
Bye.
Hola,
Adios,
Lisa.
hola, Marina.
Nice weekend, comrades.
¿Cómo estás, Adriana?
Nice.
Muy bien, lindo verte.
Bye, everyone.
Hola, Pilar. And I think we can stop recording. Whoever is.
Okay, thank you.